So now I'm going to show you inter-servlet communication, servlet to servlet, servlet to servlet communication. Okay, so why we should discuss about this servlet to servlet communication here? Java to Java communication, how it is possible? By creating another class object, just we can make communication, right? When you have a class, simple Java class, let's say if you have a simple test, so in this test class, if you want to call any other class methods, let's say if you have a class A, and here if you have a method 1, okay, and if you have one more class B with method 2. So whenever you want to call this method 1 of A class or method 2 of B class, whenever you want to call these methods, so how to call them? First you need to create object of that class, public static void main. Whenever your test class, if it want to communicate with A class or B class, that A class instance or B class instance we should create here, right? Without having instance we can't able to communicate with other class. So here using this A reference you can call method 1, using this B reference you can call method 2. But in case of servlets, one servlet if it want to talk with another servlet, we don't have any capabilities to create objects. Actually object created by whom? Your servlet container. So that servlet container created object you need to get here. Whenever you have more than one servlet, you should not make communication like simple Java to Java communication. Whenever those servlets, if they want to talk each other, you should not make communication like simple Java. See, here I have one input form. In this input form, some fields I have here, name field, email field, some address field. Okay, just I want to do the registration. So when I submit this data first, this data I want to read in one servlet. That servlet name is validation servlet. I have a servlet here, validation servlet. In this validation servlet, just I want to apply validation for name, email and address fields. Once validations are success, then from here I want to forward this data from validation servlet to registration servlet. Okay, here I have one registration servlet. Once validation success, then I want to forward data to registered servlet. From here to here I want to forward. This is my requirement. In this case, how validation servlet it can forward that request to registered servlet? It requires registered servlet object, right? So in how many ways you can get that object here? Once if you get this data here, name, email, address. Once after getting these 3 fields, just I want to apply validations here. Validations success. If validation success, I want to forward my request to same request to register servlet. If validation fails, if success, if validation fails, just from here I want to send some error messages. That is my requirement. Okay, if validation success, I want to forward request to next servlet. If validation fail, I want to report some error messages. Okay, in this case, how validation servlet it can talk with register servlet? There are 2 ways. The first one is using get servlet method by passing your servlet name, or else using request dispatcher mechanism. Using this get servlet method or else by using request dispatcher. Using these 2 ways you can make inter-servlet communication. And one more approach we have, using send redirect mechanism. Using send redirect mechanism also you can forward your request from one servlet to another servlet. Okay, first let's discuss about these 2. By using get servlet or else by using request to dispatcher. Using this approach or this approach, it is possible to make inter-servlet communication. From one servlet to another servlet, we can pass our request. Okay, by using get servlet, you can pass your request from one servlet to another servlet. How we can? In case, once if you get request here, my servlet name is validation servlet and the servlet name is registration servlet. Okay, where we should configure the servlets configuration? Validation servlet and register or registration servlet. The servlet configurations we have to configure under web.xml file, right? So let's say here if you have web.xml file using web app servlet name, we have two servlets. One servlet is validation servlet name, and servlet class validation servlet class, and one more servlet we have. One more servlet name is servlet name something registration servlet RS, and servlet class register or registration servlet. Okay, we have two servlets configurations here. One servlet is validation servlet and one servlet is registration servlet. So whenever you want to forward your request to validation servlet, just we need to configure what URL pattern we should configure. We should configure URL pattern. When I submit this first form, first request, it need to go to validation servlet. So if my action, if it is registered, this registered action first I need to map to which servlet? Validation servlet. So validation servlet reference name is what? VS. Now here you can configure your servlet mappings. Servlet mapping. In this servlet mapping, whenever I got a request, servlet name validation servlet, URL pattern. When I get a URL pattern registered, then I want to map it to validation servlet. Okay, from validation servlet I want to map my request to registration servlet. Okay, from validation servlet just I want to map my request to registration servlet. So we have two approaches, using request to dispatcher or else by using get servlet. So here how to use get servlet? Let's say if you have do get method here, if it is do get method along with the request and response. From this do get method, if you want to forward your request, here we have get servlet context object first. There is one get servlet context method, right, in our life cycles. So get servlet context dot, it will return which object? Servlet context object it will return. Okay, how many objects it will create for entire application? One object. So that servlet context object it will return here. Servlet context dot, there is one method get servlet. Pass your servlet name here. So finally it will return what? Your servlet reference it will return. My servlet is what? Register servlet. So your registration servlet reference it will return to us. So once if you get that registration servlet, we can call do get or do post of that methods, right? You can pass your request and response by calling do post or do get. Then it will forward your request to next servlet. Okay, this is one way approach, and we have one more approach. Instead of using this context and get servlet methods, actually this is not recommended. Okay, instead of using this, here we have one more approach, request dot get request to dispatcher. Get request dispatcher. Here you should pass your servlet name. So register servlet, and it will return as request to dispatcher object. Okay, you will get a request to dispatcher object here. Request dispatcher. Once if you get this request dispatcher, if you want to forward request from here to here, they given one method request dispatcher dot forward method. In that forward method, if you pass request and response, internally this forward method will call your servlet do get method or do post method. It depends on your method. If your current request if it contains get, it will call do get. If your current request if it contains post, it will call do post method. Okay, so whenever you call request dispatcher dot forward, your request response objects, it will forward to your do get method or do post method. And in the same way, using this request dispatcher, another servlet output also you can include. There is one method request dispatcher dot include method. Using this include, what we can do, this servlet output you can include here. Okay, whenever you call forward, it will forward here. This servlet it will execute. If you have any output, that output directly it will display on UI. Whenever you use this include, it will forward your data, it will execute process, it will get output, that output and along with your servlet output, both outputs you can combine and you can send to UI. Okay, here we have two mechanisms, one is forward and one is include. You can forward a request and response from this servlet to this servlet, and as well as you can include this servlet output also here by using include. Okay, in case of include, what happens, this request and response it will forward to your servlet and that servlet output it will inherit here. Okay, so using request dispatcher approach or else by using your get servlet method, you can use those two methods for doing inter servlet communication. Okay, from one servlet to another servlet, if you want to make communication, you can use this. Okay.